The morning the Duke of Caldwell came to choose a bride, Eliza Whitaker was on her knees, scrubbing the marble floor of a house that would never belong to her. She heard the carriage. She heard the sisters laughing upstairs. She heard Lady Ashford say, "Make sure that woman stays out of sight." Eliza wrung the dirty water from her rag and kept scrubbing. She had learned long ago that invisible was the only safe thing to be. She did not know that by sundown, the most powerful man in the county would refuse to look at anyone else. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, because what happens next will stay with you. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Ashford estate had been scrubbed, polished, and perfumed for 3 weeks in preparation for one single afternoon. Every vase had been filled with fresh flowers ordered from the city. Every curtain had been pressed. Every candlestick had been rubbed until it caught the light, just so. The kitchen had been running since 4 in the morning, producing cakes and savories and little finger sandwiches that Lady Margaret Ashford had seen described in a society column and decided were absolutely essential for impressing a duke. Because that was what this afternoon was about, impressing Duke Adrian Caldwell. Adrian Caldwell was 34 years old, the youngest man to hold the Caldwell dukedom in 3 generations, and the most sought-after unmarried man in the entire county. He owned 6,000 acres of productive farmland in the valley, a wool processing operation that supplied 3 neighboring counties, a mill, and a manor house that people described in whispers as though it were a cathedral. He had served 2 terms advising the county magistrate on land reform. He had rebuilt the Caldwell tenant cottages after a flood took them down 4 years ago, paying from his own pocket when the county refused to act. He was, by every measure, an extraordinary man, and Lady Ashford intended to attach one of her daughters to him before any other family in the county had the chance. She had 3 daughters. She considered all 3 excellent candidates, though for different reasons. Vivian was the eldest at 26. Tall, dark-haired, and sharp as a new blade, Vivian had spent her girlhood studying everything a woman of ambition could quietly absorb: household accounts, estate management, political gossip, and the art of appearing to agree with powerful men while steering conversations precisely where she wanted them to go. She was not warm, she did not try to be. She believed warmth was a performance, and she had never respected performances. Rosalind was 23 and the beauty of the family, which she wore like a weapon she had been handed at birth and trained to use since. She knew exactly how to tilt her head when a man was speaking so that the light caught her hair. She knew how long to hold eye contact before looking away modestly. She had broken 2 engagements already, one because the man's finances turned out to be less impressive than reported, and one because she simply found him boring. She was not cruel. She was practical, and she intended to be happy, which she equated with being comfortable. Clara was 20 at the youngest, soft-spoken, and genuinely kind in a way that made her sisters feel vaguely embarrassed for her. She liked animals and small children, and had a habit of stopping conversations to listen to servants give reports as though said actually mattered to her. Lady Ashford found this quality alarming in a girl who needed to marry well. Clara found the pressure to marry well quietly exhausting. 3 daughters, all prepared. And then there was Eliza. Eliza Whitaker did not appear on any list Lady Ashford had prepared. She was not a daughter. She was not a niece. She was not technically a servant, though she performed the work of 3. She occupied a strange and specific position in the Ashford household that had no official name. She was the late Mr. Ashford's sister's child, orphaned at 4 when her parents died of fever. Taken in because abandoning her entirely would have caused talk, and then quietly, systematically, kept just far enough from family status that no one was ever required to treat her as family. She slept in the small room off the kitchen. She managed the household accounts because she was good with numbers and because it saved the cost of hiring someone. She supervised the servants because she had a natural authority that the servants responded to, though she never raised her voice. She cooked when the actual cook was ill, which was frequently because the actual cook was elderly and had been with the family long enough that Lady Ashford was too proud to replace her. She mended clothes, managed the linen inventory, negotiated with suppliers, settled disputes between the kitchen girls, and kept the kind of detailed record of household expenditures that meant the Ashford family had survived 2 bad harvest seasons without anyone in the family understanding why. She was 23 years old. She had not been outside the estate boundaries in 8 months. On the morning of the Duke's visit, Lady Ashford found Eliza in the kitchen, going over the supply inventory, and told her, in a voice like a closed door, that she was to remain in the back of the house during the entire visit, appear only if needed to serve tea, and under absolutely no circumstances was she to speak to the Duke or place herself anywhere she might be noticed. "Yes, ma'am," Eliza said. She did not look up from the inventory. She had already known this without being told. Adrian Caldwell arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon with his land steward, a man named Hobbs who was as colorless and efficient as a well-maintained machine, and a letter of introduction from the county magistrate that no one actually needed because everyone knew exactly who Adrian Caldwell was. He stepped down from the carriage into the gravel drive and stood for a moment looking at the house. He was not what people expected when they imagined a duke. He was broad-shouldered and plainly dressed for a man of his station, wearing a well-made but unremarkable coat and boots that had seen actual use. His face was weathered in a way that suggested he spent time outdoors doing something other than looking picturesque. He had dark eyes that moved carefully around a room and a manner of absolute stillness that made people feel, when he was paying attention to them, that they were the only thing in the world worth attending to. And when he was not paying attention to someone, they felt it immediately. Lady Ashford met him at the door with her most practiced smile and her most practiced graciousness, and ushered him into the front drawing room, where the 3 sisters were arranged in the precise positions she had rehearsed with them that morning. Vivian was seated by the window with a book open on her lap, suggesting intelligence and composure. Rosalind was standing near the mantelpiece in a way that showed her figure to advantage, laughing softly at something her cousin had just said, suggesting warmth and natural charm. Clara was pouring lemonade with gentle care, suggesting domestic sweetness, though in truth she was simply thirsty and had forgotten she was supposed to be performing anything. Adrian entered the room. He looked at all 3 of them. He looked at the book in Vivienne's lap, and the angle of Rosalind's smile, and the careful way Clara's hands moved around the lemonade pitcher. He said good afternoon. They all responded precisely as their mother had trained them to. And Adrian felt in the pit of his stomach the same quiet and grinding disappointment he had felt in every drawing room in the county for the past 3 years. He sat down. Lady Ashford began talking. He listened. He answered questions when asked. He was not rude. He was never rude. But he watched the 3 sisters watching him with the focused intensity of people calculating an answer to a problem. And he thought about his house, his large, silent, immaculate, entirely empty house, and wondered whether a marriage built entirely on calculation would feel better or worse than the silence. Then the door at the far end of the drawing room opened. A woman came in carrying a tea service. She was not one of the sisters. She was not dressed like a member of the family. She wore a plain dark dress and had her brown hair pulled back from her face with a practicality that suggested she had done it herself that morning, without a mirror. She was slim in the way of someone who works hard and eats what is left after everyone else has been served. Her hands, when she set the tea tray on the side table, were the hands of a woman who used them constantly. She did not look at him. She did not look at anyone except the tray, which she arranged with a quiet efficiency that reminded him of a good surgeon, everything placed exactly where it belonged. No wasted movements, complete attention given to the task at hand. Rosalind looked over at the tray and said, without looking at the woman who had carried it. "The cups are the wrong ones. I told you yesterday to use the blue set." The woman Eliza looked at the cups for just a moment. "The blue set has 2 pieces with hairline cracks." "Miss Rosalind, I thought it better not to risk them with hot tea in front of guests. I didn't ask for your opinion." "I asked for the blue set." "Yes, miss." There was a pause that lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Adrian watched it. In those 2 seconds, something passed Eliza's face, not anger. Not fear, not humiliation, though all 3 would have been reasonable, but something quieter and more controlled than any of those. A steadiness. The steadiness of a person who has made a private decision about how much of themselves they will give to a moment, and who gives exactly that much and nothing more. "I'll change them now," she said. She reached for the tray. Adrian said, "Please leave them." Every person in the room looked at him. Eliza's hands went still on the tray. "The cups are fine," he said. He looked at Rosalind. It was a good reason. Rosalind blinked. Lady Ashford said, with the smile of a woman rerouting a carriage around a fallen tree, "Your Grace, might I pour for you? Vivian, darling." "Come and sit closer." The Duke was just about to tell us about the improvements to Caldwell Manor. The conversation resumed. Eliza finished arranging the tray and moved to stand near the fireplace, where her job was to monitor the tea level and refill cups as needed. This was her position, close enough to be useful, far enough away to be ignorable. She was very good at being ignorable. Adrian spent the next 40 minutes listening to the 3 sisters demonstrate their respective excellences. Vivienne talked about county politics with the precision of someone who had done genuine research. Rosalind made him laugh twice, which he suspected was intentional, and which he found himself appreciating anyway. Clara asked him unexpectedly and with apparent sincerity whether it was true he had rebuilt the tenant cottages. And when he said yes, she asked whether the families had been properly housed during the construction. And when he said they had been, she looked genuinely relieved in a way that was clearly not performance. He liked all 3 of them better than he had expected to. He was still not going to marry any of them. He knew it the way he knew other things quietly. With complete certainty, without being able to fully explain it. There was nothing wrong with them. There was nothing wrong with the afternoon. There was nothing wrong with the house, which was beautifully kept. He was watching Eliza. He had been watching her, he realized. For most of the past 40 minutes. Not obviously. Not in any way anyone would notice. But each time the conversation gave him a natural moment to look away. His eyes went back to the woman standing near the fireplace. She refilled Vivienne's cup without being asked, having apparently observed the precise moment Vivienne's cup reached a level that would require a refill within the next few minutes. She noticed when Clara's shawl slipped from her shoulder and was about to speak, then stopped herself probably, Adrian thought, calculating that drawing attention to Clara's shawl would draw attention to herself. And she had been told not to draw attention to herself. She heard everything that was said in the room. He was certain of it. Behind those carefully downcast eyes, there was a mind that was cataloging, sorting and filing every word of every conversation simultaneously. She was not pretending not to be intelligent. She was simply not being given permission to be. The difference struck him so sharply it was almost physical. He set down his cup. "Excuse me," he said. He said to the room generally. Which meant Lady Ashford couldn't easily object without being impolite. He stood up and walked toward the fireplace. Eliza saw him coming and went very still. He stopped at a polite distance. He said, quietly enough that the conversation across the room could reasonably continue without them. "How long have you worked in this house?" She looked up at him for the first time. Her eyes were gray, which surprised him somehow. Clear gray. Like water over stone. 19 years, Your Grace. Since you were a child, since I was 4, he let that sit for a moment. You heard everything in that conversation. It was not quite a question. She did not deny it. Yes, Your Grace, you had opinions about some of it. Another pause. He watched her decide whether honesty was safe. He watched her decide, carefully, that it probably wasn't, and then he watched her decide something else, something that seemed to cost her more than the first decision. About the tenant cottages, she said. Miss Clara asked the right question. But the more important one is what happens when the lease agreements come up for renewal. Most of the cottages on an estate this size have rolling leases with no protection for the tenants against rent increases after improvements are made. If you rebuilt them from your own funds and then adjusted the rent to recover the cost, the families are no better housed than they were before. She stopped. She seemed almost startled by her own words. He looked at her steadily. And are your cottages here protected? Something shifted in her face. No, Your Grace. But the accounts are well kept. I try to keep them accurate. I looked at the main ledger on the front table when I came in, he said. That wasn't quite true. He'd glanced at a household account book that had been left open. Probably by accident. The figures are precise. The margin notes are clear. Someone knows this estate better than most landowners know their own property. Eliza said nothing. I would guess, he said, that person is standing in front of me. She looked at the floor. It is my responsibility, she said. Someone has to know. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What is your name? She glanced up again. Briefly, as if surprised he had asked, Eliza Whitaker. Your Grace, Miss Whitaker. He said, Thank you for the tea. He said it simply, as one person says something to another person. Eliza looked as though she did not quite know what to do with it. He returned to his seat. Lady Ashford asked him, with a smile held together by considerable effort, whether he had found everything to his satisfaction. Yes, he said, quite. The afternoon moved toward its conclusion. Lady Ashford began, with practiced delicacy, to maneuver the conversation toward the question future visits, which was how these afternoons ended when they had gone well in agreement to see each other again, which was as close to a formal expression of interest as society allowed at this early stage. Adrian listened to her maneuvering and drank his tea. Vivian was watching him with the focused attention of a chess player 3 moves ahead. Rosalind was laughing at something her cousin said, but her eyes were tracking him over the rim of her glass. Clara was looking at her hands, and Eliza was refilling the sugar dish and pretending, with considerable skill, that she was furniture. Adrian set down his cup. Lady Ashford, he said, you have a remarkable household. You are very kind. Your Grace. I mean it specifically, he said. The organization is exceptional. The accounts I saw earlier were some of the clearest I've encountered outside my own steward's office. The staff appears well managed. The supply chain, the fact that your pantry is fully stocked before the end of summer, rather than scrambling in autumn the way most houses this size do, suggests someone with considerable foresight. Lady Ashford looked confused. This was not how these conversations went. Yes. We try to run an orderly household. Who is responsible for it? The confusion deepened. Lady Ashford looked toward Eliza with something that was not quite acknowledgement. Eliza assists with some of the household management. She manages it entirely. I suspect, Adrian said. He said it mildly, without accusation. The room was very quiet. Vivian's expression did not change, but her posture shifted by a fraction of an inch. Rosalind's smile remained in place. She was very up, Lady Ashford said, with the careful tone of a woman diffusing a misunderstanding before it could become an insult. Eliza has been very useful to us, Your Grace. She has been with us since she was a small child. We have been glad to have her. I imagine you have, Adrian said. Another silence. Then he said, I wonder if I might speak with her for a few minutes. Privately, of course, with the door open. Every face in the room changed. Lady Ashford's smile became the kind of smile that is not a smile at all. Vivian's composure cracked slightly at the corners. Rosalind set down her glass. Clara looked between Adrian and Eliza with something that might, in another context, have been described as hope. Eliza herself went absolutely still. Lady Ashford said slowly, "Of course, Your Grace. If that is your wish." It was his wish. They moved to the small sitting room adjacent to the drawing room. Lady Ashford left the connecting door open and positioned herself just inside the drawing room at an angle that allowed her to watch without appearing to watch. She was very practiced at this. Adrian sat in one of the chairs. Eliza stood. He looked at her. "Please sit down, Miss Whitaker." She sat carefully on the very edge of the chair, the posture of a person who has been told, in 100 small ways over many years, that she does not have the right to make herself comfortable. He noticed it. "How much do they pay you?" he said. She blinked. "I beg your pardon." "For managing the household." "The accounts, the staff, the supply ordering, the everything you clearly do." "How much?" Eliza was quiet for a moment. "I receive room and board," she said. "And some household funds for personal necessities." "No wage, no. You manage an estate of this size for room and board." She looked at her hands. "It is more than many people have." He was silent for a moment. "Then," he said, "what would you do, Miss Whitaker, if you had a choice?" "Not the choices available to you here. Any choice." She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes, something old and guarded. Like a door that has been locked for so long the person inside has almost forgotten it can open. "I would have my own household to manage," she said. Quietly, where the decisions I made were actually mine. Where the accounts I kept were in my own name. She paused. Where I could hire fair wages and keep proper records, and she stopped herself. "I'm sorry." "That was honest," he said. She looked at him. "It was honest," he said again. "I find I have a considerable preference for honesty." There was a pause. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees, which was not particularly ducal posture, but which was apparently how he sat when he was thinking carefully. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "I came here today to look at 3 daughters of a family with a respectable name. I have spent the last hour and a half in their company." She waited. "They are accomplished women," he said. "Vivian is intelligent. Rosalind is charming. Clara, which I think is underrated as a quality." Eliza nodded carefully. "None of them," he said, looked at me like a person. She did not say anything. "I do not mean that as a cruelty," he said. "I understand what they're doing. I understand what this afternoon is, and what it's for. They are trying to make the best match available to them, which is what they have been told correctly that they must do. I hold no contempt for that." "But," Eliza said, and then seemed surprised at herself for saying it. "But I have spent 10 years as Duke of Caldwell," he said. "And in that time I cannot tell you how many afternoons like this one I have sat through. How many drawing rooms. How many impeccably dressed women who had studied me in advance and prepared their answers for questions they anticipated I would ask, and laughed at appropriate moments, and asked about my estates with the exact degree of interest that suggested competence without appearing to challenge my authority." He paused. "It is exhausting," he said, "to be studied," Eliza said. "Very quietly, I imagine it is. You know what it feels like." She looked at him sharply. "You have been studied your entire life," he said. "Measured, found useful or not useful, assigned a value based on what you could provide." She did not answer. He said, "I noticed that you argued about the teacups." She blinked. That was not an argument. I simply explained." "You had a reason," he said. "A practical, correct reason, based on your own observation and judgment. And when someone with more social power than you told you your reason was wrong, you did not apologize for having had it. You simply said you would comply and then waited to see what happened." Eliza stared at him. "That," he said, "is either exceptional courage or exceptional stubbornness." A silence. Then, against what was clearly her better judgment, Eliza said, "My mother always said they were the same thing." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me about the accounts." And she did. For the next 20 minutes, she told him about the accounts. She told him about the supply contracts she had renegotiated the previous spring that had reduced the Ashford household's quarterly expenditure by 11%. She told him about the 3 servants she had quietly promoted to positions of greater responsibility, because they were performing that work anyway, without recognition or additional pay, and how the resulting improvement in staff morale had reduced turnover significantly. She told him about the problem with the east wing roof that she had identified and flagged to Lady Ashford twice in writing and once in person, and which had still not been repaired, and her estimate of what it would cost if the water damage progressed through another winter. She told him all of this in a voice that was careful and precise and entirely without self-consciousness, because he had asked, and because someone was finally listening. When she finished, there was a long silence. From the drawing room, visible through the open door, Lady Ashford was maintaining a fixed expression that cost her visible effort. "You've been managing this estate," Adrian said, "as competently as most paid stewards I've employed." "I've simply done what needed doing," Eliza said. "Someone had to, and you received nothing for it." She looked at her hands again. "I had somewhere to sleep," she said. He stood up. She stood immediately, which was the reflexive response of someone who had spent years positioning themselves subordinate to whoever was standing. He said, "Miss Whitaker, I am going to return to the drawing room and speak to Lady Ashford." She nodded. "And then," he said, "I'm going to say something that is going to make things considerably more difficult for you in this house for the immediate future." Eliza went very still. "I'm telling you in advance," he said, "because you deserve to know what's coming. And because you will need to decide, quickly, whether you want to stop me." She looked at him. "I won't stop you," she said. "You don't know what I'm going to say?" "No," she said. "But I know this house, and I know that anything that makes things more difficult for me here is also something I've been waiting for someone to do for a very long time." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he said, "All right, then." He walked back into the drawing room. Lady Ashford rose from her chair with the careful composure of a woman who has spent the last 20 minutes for approximately 14 different diplomatic sentences for approximately 14 different scenarios. "Your Grace," she said. "I hope, Lady Ashford," Adrian said. "I want to thank you for this afternoon. You have a genuinely impressive household. You are too kind. I've decided," he said. Lady Ashford's composure sharpened into focus. This was the moment. Everything before this had been prologue. Vivian sat straighter. Rosalind lifted her chin. Clara, bless her, appeared to be silently hoping for something, though she could not have said what. "I came here intending to consider a suitable match among your daughters," Adrian said. "And I have spent the afternoon doing exactly that." "Indeed," Lady Ashford said. "They are accomplished women," he said. He meant it sincerely. "Vivian is more capable than most men I've sat across a negotiating table from. Rosalind has a natural understanding of people that most people spend their entire lives trying to develop. Clara asks the right questions and listens to the answers, which is rarer than it should be." Lady Ashford allowed herself, for just a moment, a genuine smile. "However," Adrian said. The smile did not disappear. It simply became a different kind of smile. A waiting kind. "I find I am not in a position to pursue a match with any of your daughters." The silence that followed was not exactly silent. It had texture. It had the particular quality of a room full of people deciding, simultaneously, how to respond to something that had not been supposed to happen. Lady Ashford said, "I see. What I am in a position to do," Adrian said, "is make a different proposal entirely." In the doorway to the small sitting room, Eliza had appeared. She was standing very still. Her hands were clasped in front of her, which was not quite the position of someone relaxed, but was the position of someone who has decided to hold themselves together by force of will. Adrian looked at her. Then he looked back at Lady Ashford. "Miss Eliza Whitaker," he said, "has managed your household for 19 years. She has maintained your accounts, supervised your staff, managed your supply contracts, and if her assessment of the east wing roof is correct, which I suspect it is, has been attempting to prevent a fairly significant structural problem that has been ignored. She has received in exchange room and board. Lady Ashford's expression was no longer the expression of a woman at a social gathering. What I am proposing, Adrian said, is that I would like to call on Miss Whitaker. With your permission, and with appropriate chaperonage. Of course, the room did not explode, it imploded. The implosion was quieter than an explosion, and considerably more dangerous. Lady Ashford said, Your Grace, just those 2 words. But the way she said them carried an entire argument. Vivienne said nothing. Her silence was its own language. Rosalind said, with a brightness that was almost convincing. I must have misunderstood, Clara said very quietly. Oh, Eliza in the doorway had not moved at all. Adrian remained exactly where he was, in the center of the room, with the particular stillness of a man who has made a decision and has no intention of reconsidering it. I understand this is unexpected, he said. Unexpected, Lady Ashford repeated. And I understand if you have concerns about the arrangement. Concerns, Lady Ashford said, in the tone of a woman for whom the word concerns does not begin to cover what she is experiencing. She is not. Lady Ashford stopped, recalibrated. Began again. Eliza's position in this household, Your Grace, is clear to me, Adrian said. Yes, another silence. She has no name, Rosalind said. She said it with a smile, which made it worse. She has no family, she has no connections. Your Grace, surely. She has character, Adrian said. The mildness of his voice made it land harder than anger would have. She has intelligence. She has 19 years of demonstrated competence and, as far as I can determine, the closest thing to genuine integrity that I have encountered in a very long time. He paused. Those qualities, he said, are more useful to me than a name. Eliza pressed one hand flat against the doorframe. Just to have something solid to hold on to, Lady Ashford said. I would need to. This requires consideration. Of course, Adrian said. And Eliza, Lady Ashford turned to look at her, and in that look was the specific quality of calculation that Eliza had been studied with for most of her life. Eliza would need to, Adrian said. Will speak for herself, if she is willing. He looked at her. Eliza looked back at him in the doorway, in the plain dark dress, with her hands that knew the ledgers and the linen closets and the supply contracts and every cracked cup in the cabinet. 19 years of invisible. And then one afternoon. One man who looked. Yes, Eliza said, I'm willing. And in the drawing room of Ashford Manor, with the pressed curtains and the freshly polished candlesticks and the little sandwiches from the society column, everything that Lady Ashford had planned for the afternoon came apart at the seams. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the particular finality of a knot that has been tied wrong for a very long time and has finally, under the right kind of pressure, simply let go. Lady Ashford did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. She had learned, over 30 years of managing a household and a family and a reputation, that a raised voice was a sign of lost control, and she did not lose control. But when Adrian Caldwell's carriage pulled out of the gravel drive that evening, the sound of it hadn't finished fading before she turned from the front window and looked at Eliza with an expression that was quieter and more dangerous than anything she had ever directed at her before. Go to the kitchen, she said. Eliza went. She sat at the kitchen table and listened to the house rearrange itself around the afternoon's wreckage. She could hear Lady Ashford's voice from the drawing room, low and controlled. She could hear Vivienne answer her, once in a tone that was clipped and precise. She could hear Rosalind laugh a short, sharp sound, not the practiced laugh from the afternoon, but something with an edge to it. She did not hear Clara at all, which was either because Clara was being very quiet or because Clara had removed herself from the conversation entirely, which was a thing Clara sometimes did when conversations became things she didn't want to be part of. The kitchen was warm, The cook, Mrs. Beale, had fallen asleep in her chair by the stove, the way she did every evening, her chin dropping to her chest with the absolute peacefulness of a woman who had decided the world's problems were not hers to solve after 7 o'clock. Eliza sat and looked at the table and thought about what she had said. Yes, I'm willing. She had said it clearly. She had said it in front of Lady Ashford and all three sisters in the afternoon light coming through the drawing-room windows. And she had not taken it back. She was not sure, in the quiet of the kitchen, whether she was terrified or something else entirely. Both, probably. Mostly the something else. The door opened. It was Clara. She came in without knocking, which was not unusual. Clara had always treated the kitchen as a place she was allowed to be, unlike her sisters who entered it only under duress. She sat down across from Eliza and folded her hands on the table and looked at her with large, serious eyes. Are you all right? Yes, Eliza said. Mother is. She isn't going to. Clara stopped. Started again. She doesn't have the authority to forbid it. He's a duke. She can make things unpleasant, but she can't actually stop it. Eliza looked at her. I know that too. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I thought you might. There was a pause between them that had the quality of two people who have lived in close proximity for many years and understand each other without needing to explain everything. He looked at you, Clara said. He looked at everyone. Not the same way. Clara shook her head. Vivian and Rosalind and I, he looked at us the way you look at a ledger. Organized information, useful or not useful. But when he looked at you, she paused, searching for the word. He looked at you the way you look at something when you're surprised to find it. Eliza didn't answer. I'm not saying this to make you feel a particular way, Clara said carefully. I'm saying it because I think you should know what I saw. And what did you see? Clara met her eyes. A man who came in here thinking he knew what he was looking for, and then found something he wasn't expecting, and was honest enough to say so. Eliza pressed her hands flat on the table. He doesn't know me. No, Clara agreed, but he was interested. And in my limited experience with men of power, that is genuinely rare, Mrs. Beale made a soft sound in her sleep and shifted in her chair. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up with the coming dark. Clara stood. Whatever happens, she said, I am not sorry about today. She looked at Eliza steadily. You have spent 19 years making this household work. You deserved someone to notice. She left. Eliza sat with that for a long time. Then she stood up, put the kettle on, and began preparing the household's evening accounts. Because the accounts still needed to be done, regardless of what the afternoon had been. That was the thing about her life. It kept requiring attention, even when she wasn't sure how to feel about it. The first note arrived 3 days later. It was delivered by Hobbs, Adrian's land steward, who presented it to Lady Ashford at the front door with the formal politeness of a man following instructions, someone who outranked everyone in the county. Lady Ashford accepted it with equal formality and then held it for 2 hours before giving it to Eliza, which was long enough to establish who was controlling the communication and short enough that she couldn't be accused of deliberately withholding correspondence. It was addressed in a clear, deliberate hand to Miss E. Whitaker. Lady Ashford watched Eliza open it. Eliza read it without expression, which cost her more than it looked like. The note said, I would like to call on you Saturday next, if that is agreeable. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It said it simply, directly, without the elaborate courtly language that was conventional for such communications. At the bottom, he had written, I should mention that I have verified your estimate of the east wing roof damage. You were correct. The repair will cost considerably more than it would have 6 months ago. That was all. No flourish, no sentiment, just information. Shared between two people who both found its information useful. She read it twice. Then she said to Lady Ashford, He would like to call on Saturday, I heard Lady Ashford said. You'll receive him in the front parlor. The door will remain open. I will be present, she paused. That is not a request. Ma'am, Eliza said. She took the note back to her room, the small room off the kitchen, and set it on the table next to the window. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went back to work. Saturday came. Adrian arrived at 2:00, which said something about him that Eliza filed away, without quite deciding what it meant yet. He came without Hobbs this time, with only a driver, which was a smaller party than his first visit, and which Lady Ashford noted with the precise attention of a woman cataloging everything that might be relevant. He came into the front parlor and sat across from Eliza, with Lady Ashford positioned in the chair nearest the door, and said, "With how is the household?" "Running well," Eliza said. "And the East Wing?" "Lady Ashford has ordered the preliminary repairs." She didn't look at Lady Ashford when she said this. Lady Ashford had in fact ordered the repairs after receiving a separate letter from the county's building inspector, who had apparently been contacted by someone and asked to conduct an assessment. Eliza had a reasonably clear idea of who had arranged that, though she had no proof. "Good," Lady Ashford said, with the tone of a woman inserting herself into a conversation, because that was her right and her intention. "Your Grace, I want you to understand that we are very fond of Eliza. She has been a part of our household for many years." "Yes," Adrian said. "I understand." Lady Ashford chose her words carefully. "She is not accustomed to that, she has not had the experience that a young woman of family would have had. In terms of society and Lady Ashford," Adrian said. He said it gently but with the specific quality of finality. "I appreciate your concern. I will manage." Lady Ashford closed her mouth. Eliza looked at her hands and did not allow herself any expression whatsoever. Adrian looked at Eliza. "Tell me about the supply contracts you renegotiated last spring." And so the afternoon went. Not the way these afternoons were supposed to go, not with gentle questions about interests and preferences, and gentle answers designed to suggest compatibility. Instead, they talked about household management and estate accounting, and the particular problem of negotiating with suppliers who believed women couldn't tell a falsified invoice from a legitimate one. They talked about the tenant cottage leases, because Eliza had opinions about them that she had been holding for years with nowhere to put them. They talked about the mill, because she had walked past it twice in her life and observed things. And he had questions about what she'd observed. Lady Ashford sat in her chair by the door and listened to the most unusual courtship conversation she had ever witnessed and could not decide whether to be confused or insulted. Afterward, in the gravel drive, as Hobbs brought the carriage around, Adrian paused. "Miss Whitaker," he said. Eliza had walked to the door with him because Lady Ashford had briefly been called away by the cook, and those 30 seconds of relative privacy were apparently what he'd been waiting for. "There will be talk," he said. "I expect you know that. Yes, people will say things about why I've done this. Most of what they say will not be kind. I know, I want you to know," he said, "that my intention is not." He stopped, reconsidered. "This is not strategy," he said. "I am not doing this to shock anyone, or to prove a point, or to—" "I know that, too," Eliza said. He looked at her. "I know," she said again, more quietly. "I spent the afternoon watching you talk, Your Grace. You are not a man who does things for effect." A pause. "No," he said. "I suppose I'm not. It's one of the more obvious things about you," she said, and then seemed to realize that might have been too direct. But he smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that changed the whole character of a face. "You're going to be difficult to manage," he said. "I've been told," Eliza said. He left. She stood in the doorway for a moment after the carriage had gone. In the cooling afternoon, with the wind in the trees and the sound of Lady Ashford somewhere inside the house beginning, probably to prepare what she planned to say, she breathed. Then she went inside. The second visit was the following Saturday. The third was Wednesday of the week after. By the fourth visit, Vivian had stopped coming to the parlor when Adrian was there. Whether this was pride or calculation, or simply an inability to watch something she hadn't wanted to witness, Eliza couldn't determine. She noted the absence and said nothing. Rosalind, on the other hand, came to the parlor every single time. She would position herself on the window seat and work at her embroidery with the focused attention of a woman who was not, in any way, actually doing embroidery. She was listening. She was cataloging. And only once when Adrian had made a comment about estate management that Rosalind found surprising. She had looked up and said, "Is that actually how the mill contracts work?" And they had spent 20 minutes discussing it. And Rosalind had asked 3 intelligent questions in a row. And Eliza had watched Adrian file something away about Rosalind that she suspected Rosalind had been hiding for years. But it was Clara who surprised her most. Clara had taken to joining them at the end of each visit for the last quarter hour, and talking with Adrian with a directness that suggested she had decided that she liked him and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She told him about the tenants' children she had been quietly tutoring in letters 3 mornings a week in the old laundry room. A thing her mother didn't know about, and which Eliza had been covering for her in the accounts for 2 years. She told him it wasn't enough one person, one room, 3 mornings a week, and that what was needed was a proper school, with a proper teacher, properly funded. Adrian had listened to this with the full and specific intent he gave things that interested him. Then he had said, "I have been attempting to fund exactly such a school on my own estate for 2 years. The difficulty is finding a teacher the community will actually trust." Clara had looked at him. "I will do it," she said, "if anyone builds it." Eliza had said. "I mean it," Clara said. She looked at Adrian. "I am not the eldest, and I have no particular beauty, and I have no gift for flattening myself into whatever shape a man wants. But I can teach, and I can make people trust me because I actually do care about them." "Yes," Adrian said. "That is an extremely useful thing." Lady Ashford, who had been listening from the doorway, said, in a voice that could have frozen water, "Clara." Clara looked at her mother. "We will discuss this later," Lady Ashford said. "All right," Clara said pleasantly. It was around this time that Eliza began to understand what Adrian Caldwell was doing. He was not just calling on her. He was looking at the whole household. He was learning everything, the way she learned things, by watching, by asking, by sitting with information until it showed him its shape. He was looking at the 3 sisters not as potential wives he had passed over, but as people, which was apparently a thing he did with everyone, and which seemed to catch most people completely off guard. He was looking at Lady Ashford, too, with a particular kind of attention that was not unkind but was completely clear. Eliza noticed that he always listened when Lady Ashford spoke and always responded with perfect courtesy and never, not once, allowed himself to be maneuvered. He was very good at not being maneuvered. He did it without any apparent effort, the way a very experienced swimmer handles a current, not by fighting it, but by understanding it well enough to choose his angle. She mentioned this to him one afternoon, when Lady Ashford had gone to speak to the cook, and they had 5 minutes of privacy. "You're very practiced," she said, "at not being pushed." He looked at her with mild surprise. "Am I? You know exactly what she's doing every time she tries to redirect a conversation, and you let her think she's done it while going exactly where you intended anyway." A pause. "That is," he said slowly, "a very accurate description. How long did it take you to learn that?" "About 3 years," he said. "After my father died and I inherited, I spent the first 6 months being redirected constantly by people who had decided I was young enough to manage." He paused. "I was redirected into some genuinely poor decisions before I began paying closer attention." "What kind of decisions?" He looked at her. "The kind I spent the next 3 years undoing." He paused again. "Including, if I am honest, a near engagement that 2 families and a solicitor were very enthusiastic about, and which I walked away from 6 days before the formal announcement." Eliza was quiet for a moment. "What changed your mind?" he said. "I asked her what she wanted, not from the marriage, but from her life, what she would do if she had no constraints." He looked at the table between them. She couldn't answer me. She had never been asked. and I realized that I didn't want a marriage built between two people, one of whom has never been allowed to know herself. Eliza heard what was underneath that. She let it sit. Then she said carefully, "And what do you want?" "If you have no constraints." He looked at her steadily. "A house that is a home. Work that matters. Someone who tells me the truth." He paused. "Someone who is not performing." "I'm not performing," Eliza said. "I know," he said. "That is the point." Lady Ashford came back into the room. The conversation closed over itself like water, and they returned to the ordinary register of an afternoon call. And nothing that had passed between them in those 5 minutes was mentioned again. But it sat with Eliza through the rest of the afternoon, through the evening, through the quiet hour she spent at the kitchen table with the accounts after everyone else had gone to bed. She had spent 19 years not being seen. She was finding the experience of being seen really seen. The way he looked at her, like she was something that made complete sense and was also still surprising, deeply disorienting. And also, she admitted to herself in the dark kitchen with Mrs. Beale asleep in her chair and the fire down to embers. The truest thing she had felt in as long as she could remember. The letter from Lady Ashford's cousin arrived on a Tuesday in the 3rd week. Eliza knew about it because she managed the household correspondence, which was a thing that had not changed regardless of the circumstances. Because someone had to, and Lady Ashford had never learned the filing system well enough to manage it herself. She did not read it. She never read personal correspondence. She received it, recorded it, sorted it, and delivered it. That was her system, and she had never deviated from it. But she knew who it was from because she recognized the handwriting and the seal. And she knew that Lady Ashford had written to her cousin Margaret Forsyth 3 days earlier, in a letter that had passed through Eliza's hands on its way to the post, and which had been sealed before it reached her, so she could not read it. She delivered it. She went back to work that afternoon. Lady Ashford found her in the linen room taking inventory. "Sit down, Eliza." Eliza set down her ledger and sat on the linen trunk. Lady Ashford stood. She had the particular bearing of a woman who had prepared what she was going to say. "I want you to understand something," Lady Ashford said. "I am not your enemy." Eliza waited. "I have housed you and fed you for 19 years, Lady Ashford said. "I have given you work that used your abilities. I have not turned you out. Which, as I think you understand, I could have done at any point." "Yes." "Ma'am," Eliza said. "What is happening with Duke Caldwell?" Lady Ashford stopped. "Reorganized. I want you to think clearly about this. About what you actually are to him." "Ma'am, you are a curiosity," Lady Ashford said. And said it without cruelty, which made it considerably worse. "He is a man who has grown bored with his choices, and you have offered him novelty. That is all. In 6 perhaps sooner the novelty will pass. And you will have made enemies of every person in this county who matters. And you will have nowhere to go, because you will have burned the only home you have by believing a man's momentary interest was something more." Eliza looked at her. "I know you believe this is real," Lady Ashford said. "I am telling you that you do not have enough experience of men to know how real feels different from interesting." The silence was long. Then Eliza said, "How do you know I don't have that experience?" Lady Ashford blinked. "You know everything else about me," Eliza said. "You have watched me for 19 years. But you don't know that." She kept her voice even. "I know the difference between a man looking at a woman and a man looking at who a woman actually is. I have watched enough men in this house to know the difference very clearly." Lady Ashford's expression shifted by a fraction. "He talks to me," Eliza said. "Not me, not around me. Not past me at the version of me he's decided to see. He asks questions and he listens to the actual answers. He remembered last week that I mentioned in passing, 3 weeks ago, that the supplier in town had been inconsistent with the flour deliveries. And he came back this week with information about that supplier's other accounts that I hadn't known." She paused. He noticed. Because it mattered to me. Lady Ashford was quiet. I am not naive, Eliza said. I know what I am in this county. I know what people say about a woman without a name. I know what the risks are. She looked at Lady Ashford directly, which was something she rarely allowed herself. But I also know that no one has ever treated me the way he treats me. And I would rather take the risk than spend another 19 years invisible in this house. The word invisible landed. Lady Ashford's face did not change exactly, but something moved behind it. She said, after a long moment, "You have always been very certain about things." "Yes, ma'am." Lady Ashford stopped. "It has not always been easy," she said. In a different tone. Less prepared. More like she was finding the words in the moment, rather than retrieving them from a prepared speech. Eliza waited. "Your mother was like that," Lady Ashford said. Eliza went very still. Lady Ashford did not speak about Eliza's mother. In 19 years, she had not mentioned her once. "She was my husband's sister," Lady Ashford said, "and she was the most certain person I have ever known. She was certain about the man she married, your father, whom everyone told her was wrong for her, who had no money and no connections, and who loved her so completely and so plainly that it embarrassed people." She paused. She was right, and they were wrong. They had 6 years. Eliza did not breathe. She would. Lady Ashford stopped again. Something was moving in her face that was unfamiliar to it, as though the muscles were being asked to arrange themselves in a configuration they didn't usually take. "She would have been proud of you," she said. "She would have been terrified, but proud." The linen room was very quiet. Eliza said, "Why didn't you tell me that before?" "Because it was easier not to," Lady Ashford said simply. And then, as if the admission had exhausted her, "I'll tell cook to save you a plate this evening. You've been working through supper again." She left. Eliza sat in the linen room for a long time. She sat with the inventory ledger in her lap and her hands completely still, and something working through her chest that she did not have a name for. Not grief exactly. Not gratitude exactly. Not anger at the 19 years of silence. Though all of those things were present. Something larger than all of them. The sense of a floor shifting beneath her, but in the direction of something solid. She picked up the ledger and finished the inventory. Because someone had to. Because she was and had always been the person who finished what needed finishing. But this time, for the first time she could clearly remember, she finished it with the feeling that the morning after might be something worth arriving at. Adrian came on Thursday, which was not his usual day. He came in the afternoon, again with only his driver. And he asked for Eliza directly, rather than for Lady Ashford first, which was a reversal of the usual order that Betsy the parlor maid reported to Eliza with wide eyes and a slightly breathless quality, as though she were relaying news from a battlefield. Lady Ashford was not home. She had gone to call on a neighbor and was not expected until late afternoon. Vivienne was somewhere in the house. Rosalind had gone with her mother. Clara was in the laundry room, tutoring the tenants' children, which left Eliza to receive him, which was, she suspected, not an accident. She went to the front parlor. He was standing, not seated, which meant he had either arrived just before she entered or he was restless. And she was beginning to learn that, when he was restless, it was because he was working through something. "Your Grace," she said. He looked at her. "I owe you some information." She sat down. He sat across from her. "I've had a conversation with my solicitor," he said. "About the legal standing of," he paused, "about would be required." Formally. Eliza looked at him. "There are people," he said carefully, "who believe that the gap between your standing and mine is such that no formal arrangement would be." He stopped. Tried a different angle. "My solicitor is not an unkind man, but he is a practical one. He asked me to consider whether I understood what I was proposing." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I understood it better than he did," Adrian said. "Because I have spent the past month talking to you." "And he has not." Eliza pressed her hands together in her lap. He raised Specific objections, Adrian said. Financial entailment. Social positioning. The question of children and how they would be. He stopped. I'm telling you this because you should know what the obstacles are. Not because I intend to stop. She looked at him. Really looked at him, at the set of his jaw and the directness of his eyes and the slight tension across his shoulders that said this conversation was costing him something. Which meant he cared about it. Which meant he cared about her response. Why are you telling me now? She said. Because I am going to formally ask Lady Ashford for permission to court you, he said. And before I do that, I want you to tell me, clearly and without consideration, for what you think I want to hear. Whether that is what you want. The room was quiet. You could say no, he said. Nothing would change for you here. As far as I can make it not change, I would ensure that. You can't ensure that, Eliza said. No, he admitted. I suppose I can't. And you're asking me in the middle of the week, when Lady Ashford isn't home, she said. A pause. Yes, 'cause you wanted to ask me without an audience. She looked at him for a long moment. Your Grace, she said. Adrian, he said, please. When there is no one else here, at least. She breathed. Adrian, she said. It felt like stepping off a step she hadn't known was there. I have been invisible in this house for 19 years. I have kept the accounts and managed the staff and fixed the things that were broken and held together the finances of a family that has never once introduced me as anything other than a useful person they were glad to have. She paused. And then you walked into this drawing room and asked my name, like it mattered. Like I was a person the room contained rather than furniture it had overlooked. He said nothing. He let her speak. I'm not saying yes because I have nowhere else to go, she said. I want you to understand that. I would rather have nowhere to go than say yes for the wrong reason. I know that, he said. That is stopped. That is one of the reasons I am asking. I'm saying yes, Eliza said. Because in 4 weeks of afternoons in this parlor, you have shown me more genuine attention than I have received in 19 years combined. And because I think you are lonely in the same way I am lonely not for company, but for honesty. And because I think we could give each other that. She said it plainly. Without performance, without hedging. He looked at her for a long, still moment. Yes, that is exactly it. Then ask Lady Ashford, Eliza said. I will be very interested to see what she says. He stood. She stood. He held out his hand not in the formal way of a man handing a woman across a threshold, but the way one person extends a hand to another person in a plain acknowledgement of agreement. She took it. His grip was firm and brief and completely honest. Thursday next, he said. Thursday next, she agreed. He left, and Eliza stood in the front parlor of the Ashford house, the house she had spent 19 years maintaining. The house that had housed her without ever quite belonging to her, and felt, for the first time, that the ground beneath her feet was not borrowed. It was the beginning of something. She wasn't entirely sure what. But it was hers. Adrian came on Thursday exactly as he said he would. Lady Ashford was home this time. She had made certain of it. She had also made certain that Vivienne was seated in the front drawing room with her embroidery. That Rosalind was visible through the adjoining door, arranging flowers. And that the house carried the general atmosphere of a family entirely at ease with itself and not, under any circumstances, braced for anything. Eliza recognized the staging because she had helped execute similar stagings dozens of times over the years for other visits, other purposes. She recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting on someone else's letter. She said nothing. Adrian arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. He greeted Lady Ashford with the same courteous composure he always carried and accepted tea with the same patient attention, and waited through approximately 6 minutes of conversation about the weather and the county road conditions before he said, directly and without ceremony, Lady Ashford, I would like to formally request permission to court Miss Whitaker. The room did not change physically, but everything in it shifted. Vivienne's needle stopped moving through her embroidery. Through the open door, the sound of Rosalind arranging flowers went completely silent. Lady Ashford set down her cup. She had known this was coming. She had known it since Thursday, when Betsy the parlor maid had told her, with barely contained excitement, that the Duke had come on an off day and spent 40 minutes alone with Eliza. She had spent the intervening days preparing her response with the care of someone preparing a legal document. "Your Grace," she said, "I appreciate the formality of the request. It seemed appropriate," Adrian said. "It is." She folded her hands. "I want to speak plainly with you. If I may. Eliza is not. She does not have the social foundation that a match of this nature would ordinarily require. She has no family connections, no dowry, no history in society that would support a position." She stopped herself from saying what she had been about to say, which was as your wife, and said instead in the position you are proposing. "I'm aware of all of that," Adrian said. "People will talk. People are already talking," Adrian said. "My calling here 4 times in 3 weeks has not gone unnoticed. I'm not particularly concerned about what people say. I'm concerned with what is right." Lady Ashford looked at him steadily. "And you believe this is right?" "I believe Miss Whitaker is one of the most capable and honest people I have met in 10 years of meeting a great many people," he said. "And I believe she has been given very little in return for a great deal. I intend to change that, if she is willing." A silence. Then Lady Ashford said, in a voice that had lost some of its prepared quality and had become something more unguarded, "She is willing. She told me so herself." Adrian looked at her. Something passed between them, not warmth exactly, but the recognition that 2 people who have both been paying careful attention to the same person might understand something together that they couldn't say directly. Then he said, "I believe we are in agreement," Lady Ashford said. After a moment, "I would ask one thing." "Name it." "Don't make a fool of her," Lady Ashford said. Quietly, without strategy. "Whatever this becomes, whatever it is, don't make a fool of her. She has survived a great deal by keeping her dignity intact. If you take that from her, there will be nowhere for her to go." Adrian looked at her for a long time. "No," he said. "There won't be." He said it the way people say things they mean completely. Lady Ashford nodded once. "Then you have my permission." Eliza was in the linen room when Clara found her and told her. She received the information standing with a folded sheet in her hands, and she held very still for a moment, and then she set the sheet down carefully and smoothed it with her palm, even though it did not need smoothing. "He did it," Clara said. "Mother said yes." Eliza pressed her hand flat against the shelf. "Eliza." "I'm fine," Eliza said. "I'm fine," she said again. And this time it was more true, because the initial shock had passed, and what was underneath it was something quieter and more solid. "I'm very fine," she said. "I just need a moment." Clara leaned in the doorway and gave her the moment. Outside in the corridor, they could hear Vivienne moving, the specific sound of Vivienne's quick, precise footsteps going somewhere with purpose. "She's angry," Clara said quietly. "I know, not at you," Clara said. "Or not only at you. I think she's angry at the situation. At the fact that it didn't occur to anyone that she might have wanted someone to actually look at her, instead of at her qualifications." Eliza was quiet for a moment. Did she want someone to look at her? Yes. Clara considered this. "I think Vivienne has spent so long being impressive that she's forgotten she's also a person. And watching someone be seen as a person when she's only ever been seen as impressive, that's a particular kind of painful." Eliza turned to look at her. "You are," Eliza said, "far more perceptive than anyone in this house gives you credit for." "I know," Clara said pleasantly. "It's very useful." The formal announcement of the courtship went to the county paper the following Monday. The reaction was, as Adrian had predicted, immediate and loud and almost entirely uncharitable. Mrs. Forsyth, Lady Ashford's cousin, whose letter had arrived 3 weeks earlier, wrote again. This time a longer letter which Eliza delivered sealed and did not read, and which Lady Ashford read twice and then placed face down on her desk with the particular care of someone controlling a reaction. The solicitor who managed the accounts for 3 of the largest families in the county was heard to say at the county clerk's office that it was the most extraordinary piece of foolishness he had witnessed from a man of that station, and that there would be consequences. The wives of 2 of Adrian's closest neighbors paid calls to Caldwell Manor within the week, which was faster than was technically appropriate for social calls, which meant they had come to assess the situation rather than to socialize. Adrian received them with perfect courtesy and told Hobbs afterward that the faster the county got its curiosity satisfied, the faster it would move on to something else. Hobbs said, respectfully, that he was not certain that was how county curiosity worked. Adrian said he was probably right. 2 weeks after the announcement, there was a county assembly. It was the largest social gathering of the autumn season, held in the main hall of the county seat, attended by every family of consequence within 20 miles. It was the kind of event that had its own specific gravity. People arranged themselves around it for weeks in advance, deciding what to wear, who to speak to, what to say and not say. It was the social temperature of the county made visible, and everyone who attended it understood this. Adrian asked Eliza to attend with him. She received the invitation through a note, as she had received all his communications, delivered by Hobbs and placed in her hands directly this time, rather than through Lady Ashford, which was itself a kind of statement. She read it in the kitchen. She read it twice, then she went to find Lady Ashford. "He wants to take me to the county assembly," she said. Lady Ashford looked up from her letters. "Yes," she said. "I expected he would. I don't have a dress for a county assembly." Lady Ashford was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Rosalind's blue silk was made last year and she's worn it twice. It would need taking in at the waist. You have the same coloring." Eliza stared at her. "Don't look at me like that," Lady Ashford said. "It's a practical solution. Do you want the dress or not?" Yes, thank you." And Eliza. Lady Ashford looked at her directly. "Hold your head up the entire time. Whatever anyone says to you, whatever anyone does, you look them in the eye, and you hold your head up. Do you understand me?" "Good," Lady Ashford said. That is all. The county assembly was held on a Friday evening. Adrian collected her in his carriage at 6 o'clock, which was the time named in the note, and he arrived exactly on time, which she had learned was simply who he was. He handed her into the carriage himself and looked at the dress, Rosalind's blue silk, taken in at the waist by 3 inches and let out slightly at the shoulder, which had taken Eliza 2 evenings to do by lamplight, and said, simply, "You look well. Not beautiful. Not stunning." Well, she appreciated the precision. "In the carriage," he said, "there will be people tonight who will not be kind. I know. If at any point you want to leave." "I won't want to leave," she said. He looked at her. "I have spent 19 years disappearing," she said. "I don't intend to disappear tonight." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right." The hall was full when they arrived. It had the heat and noise of a large gathering that had been underway long enough for people to have had several glasses of wine, and to have said most of the polite things, and moved on to the things underneath the polite things. The music was already playing. The candles were lit. 50 conversations were happening simultaneously. And when Adrian Caldwell walked through the door with Eliza Whitaker on his arm, approximately 40 of those 50 conversations stopped. Eliza felt it. The specific silence that is not the absence of sound but the presence of attention. She held her head up. Adrian's hand was steady under hers. He did not change his pace. He did not look around to gauge the room's reaction. He simply walked to the edge of the floor and stopped, and acknowledged, with a nod, the 3 men nearest him who were significant enough that acknowledging them mattered. The conversations resumed. They always did, but their content had changed. The first approach came from a man named Gerald Whitmore, who was 50 years old and broad and red-faced and owned the largest grain operation in the county. and who had been, according to county gossip, Adrian's primary business competitor for the past 6 years in a rivalry that was conducted with scrupulous professional courtesy and genuine mutual dislike. He walked up to them with his wife on his arm and looked at Eliza with the kind of thorough assessment that was just barely on the civil side of rude. "Caldwell," he said, "I see you've brought company." "Miss Eliza Whitaker," Adrian said. "Currently of Ashford Manor. Miss Whitaker, Gerald Whitmore and his wife." "Charlotte," Eliza met Gerald Whitmore's eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore," Charlotte Whitmore said, with the slightly desperate warmth of a woman trying to smooth over her husband's manner. "Lovely to meet you, Miss Whitaker," Gerald Whitmore said. "Whitaker, I don't know the name." "No," Eliza said. "You wouldn't." A pause. Gerald Whitmore appeared to be deciding whether she had just said something impertinent. Adrian said pleasantly, "Miss Whitaker managed the Ashford household accounts for the past several years. I understand she also renegotiated their supply contracts last spring, which I believe included some dealings with your grain operation." Gerald Whitmore looked at Eliza with an expression that had shifted from dismissive to something else. "You negotiated the Ashford contract?" "Yes," Eliza said. "You got them a better rate per bushel than they'd had the previous 3 seasons?" "Yes." His expression shifted again. "How?" And Eliza told him. Precisely, clearly, in the language of someone who understood the numbers and was not performing understanding but had it. She told him about the comparison of regional rates she had compiled, and the leverage she had used, and the specific clause she had insisted on regarding delivery reliability. When she finished, Gerald Whitmore looked at her for a moment, with the expression of a man genuinely recalibrating something. He said, which was apparently for Gerald Whitmore significant. His wife caught Eliza's eye and smiled at her with what appeared to be genuine relief, as though she had been watching her husband be difficult in public for 30 years and was glad to see someone handle it quietly. They moved on. The second approach was less manageable. Her name was Mrs. Harriet Drummond, and she was 62 years old and had been the unofficial arbiter of social standing in the county for 2 decades, which was a role she performed with the seriousness of a judge and the pleasantness of someone who genuinely believed she was doing everyone a service. She approached them near the refreshment table, with 2 other women of similar vintage flanking her in the way that was clearly habitual. And she looked at Eliza with the bright, focused attention of a woman gathering information she intended to use. "Duke Caldwell," she said. "How delightful, Mrs. Drummond," Adrian said. "And this must be." She looked at Eliza with a smile. "I have been so curious. We all have, Miss Eliza Whitaker," Eliza said. She did not wait to be introduced. "Mrs. Drummond, Mrs. Drummond's smile sharpened by a fraction. She had expected, probably, to control the introduction. "Miss Whitaker. How interesting that we haven't met before. I've rarely had occasion to attend events of this nature," Eliza said. "No, I imagine not." Mrs. Drummond tilted her head. "You've been living at Ashford Manor, I understand." "As a relation of the family?" "As a member of the household," Eliza said. "Ah." Mrs. Drummond nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something. "And how does Lady Ashford, how does she feel about the current arrangement?" Eliza looked at her directly. "You would need to ask Lady Ashford." "Of course, Mrs. Drummond's smile had not moved, but her eyes were working constantly. "Cataloging, assessing. It is simply we are all so interested in how this has come about. Duke Caldwell has been such a fixture of county society, and we know him so well." "But you are," she paused, letting the pause do its work. "Such a new acquaintance to us all," Adrian said. Mildly, but with the specific weight he could put behind mildness when he chose to. "Miss Whitaker is not new to the county. She has been here longer than most of the families at this assembly. The newness is simply a matter of who is chosen to pay attention. Mrs. Drummond's smile did not waver. "Indeed." Well, she looked at Eliza one more time with the thorough assessment of someone making a filing decision. I'm sure we will become great friends, Miss Whitaker. I look forward to knowing you better." She moved on with her flankers. Eliza breathed. Adrian said very quietly, "You did well. She'll be worse later," Eliza said. "Yes," he agreed, "but you did well." They moved through the assembly. Adrian introduced her to the county magistrate, who shook her hand, and then looked at Adrian with a slight question in his eyes, and then looked back at Eliza with increasing attention when she said something specific about the county road charter that he hadn't expected her to know. He asked her how she knew it. She told him she'd helped compile the supply figures for two of the families who had been part of the original charter negotiation, and she'd read the document itself out of curiosity. He looked at her for a moment and then said to Adrian, "You should bring her to the charter review in March." Adrian said, "I intend to." The magistrate said to Eliza, "We can use people who've actually read the document. Most people at that table haven't." Something in Eliza straightened. It happened twice more people expecting nothing. Finding something, recalibrating. A woman who managed her own sheep station asking Eliza a skeptical question about wool pricing and then continuing the conversation for 20 minutes. A solicitor who had dismissed her with his eyes at the start of the evening, catching her in a later conversation and asking a follow-up question he had clearly been thinking about since the first. Not everyone. Some people moved around her the way water moves around an obstacle, acknowledging her existence with the minimum courtesy required, and no more. Some of the women looked at her the way women look at a situation they have decided they disapprove of, but cannot say so directly. Some of the men looked at Adrian with the specific expression of men who believed he had made a mistake and felt it beneath their dignity to say so. She held her head up, every time. It was not until the third hour of the assembly that the real moment came. She was standing near the window while Adrian spoke with the county magistrate about road drainage, a long conversation about infrastructure that she was following closely, though she was not part of it, when she heard, from a cluster of women 6 feet away, the word servant. Not loudly, not pointed directly at her, just present in the air. Spoken at the volume of a woman who wanted to be heard by the people around her, but could deny having intended to be heard by anyone else. Quite extraordinary, bringing a servant to an event like this and presenting her as though Eliza turned. The woman speaking was younger than her, perhaps 20, and the daughter of one of the larger landholding families. And her name was Rebecca Alderton. And she had the specific beauty of a woman who had been told since childhood that her beauty was her most important quality, which had made her simultaneously very confident and very frightened of anything that suggested otherwise. She had two women of similar age with her, and all three of them were looking at Eliza now with the frozen expressions of people who have realized they have been heard. Eliza walked the 6 feet. She stopped. She said in a voice that was perfectly even and perfectly clear, "I beg your pardon." Rebecca Alderton lifted her chin. "I was having a private conversation in the middle of a public room," Eliza said. "And I heard you. Then perhaps you should not have been listening." "Perhaps," Eliza said. "Or perhaps you should have had the directness to say to my face what you're comfortable saying 6 feet from it." One of the other women made a small, sharp sound. Rebecca Alderton's chin remained high. "I said what I said. It isn't unkind to note what is true." "What is true," Eliza said, "is that I have managed a household of 12 people and significant property for 19 years. I have negotiated contracts, maintained accounts, and supervised operations that kept that household solvent through 2 difficult seasons. I receive no wage for this work. I have no title. I have no family connections that would make you remember my name at a party." She paused. "If that makes me a servant, then the word means something more than you are using it for." Rebecca Alderton stared at her. "And," Eliza said, "if you would like to continue this conversation, I am very willing. I find that direct conversations are almost always more productive than ones conducted just slightly too loud to be accidental." Silence. Then from behind her she heard Adrian's voice. She had not known he was close enough to hear. She turned and he was standing 3 feet away, where the conversation with the magistrate had apparently concluded or paused. And his expression was composed and still, which she had learned was what his face did when he was feeling something he was not going to let be visible in public. He looked at Rebecca Alderton. "Miss Alderton," he said. He said it as he said most things, mildly, cleanly, with the specific quality of a man who does not need to raise his voice to make his point. "My father knew your father for 30 years. I would like to think our families maintain that regard," Rebecca Alderton said. "Of course, Your Grace. Then I trust," he said, "that this is simply a misunderstanding." It was not a question. But it was not quite a statement either. It was the third thing, the thing that allowed someone to retreat with their dignity if they chose to take the offered path. Rebecca Alderton said after a moment, of course. She moved away with her companions. Adrian turned to Eliza. She was breathing carefully, which was the only visible sign of the past 2 minutes. He said very quietly, "Yes," she said. "That was, I know, you did not need me to say anything." "No," she said. "But I'm glad you were there." He looked at her. And there was something in that look, something he hadn't said yet. Something she hadn't said yet, something that had been building through 4 weeks of Thursday afternoons, and careful questions and honest answers, that was present between them in the air, like a thing taking shape. He said, "I think we should go." "Yes," she said. "I think we should." In the carriage on the way back, he said, "The magistrate wants you at the charter review in March." "I know." "I heard." She looked at him. "To a county charter review." "Yes, as what?" He met her eyes. "As the person who has actually read the document." She laughed. It surprised her, the laugh, clean and genuine and unguarded. The kind she didn't produce often because it required not watching herself. He smiled. Not the polite smile or the composed smile. The real one, the one that changed the whole character of his face. "Adrian," she said. Yes, she looked at her hands for a moment. Then at him. "When you asked Lady Ashford for permission, what did she say?" "Exactly?" He was quiet for a moment. "She said, 'Don't make a fool of her.'" Eliza breathed. "And what did you say?" "I said no," he said. "I said there won't be anywhere for her to go if you do." She sat with that. "She told me something," Eliza said, "about my mother." He waited. "She said my mother was certain," Eliza said, "that she was the most certain person she'd ever known. That she married my father even though everyone told her he was wrong for her." She paused. "She said she was right and they were wrong." "Yes," Adrian said quietly. "She said my mother would have been proud of me," Eliza said. "And terrified." "That sounds right." "Yes," she looked out at the dark, passing trees. "It does." The carriage moved through the county night, and she sat with everything the evening had been, the way Gerald Whitmore's expression had shifted, and the magistrate's hand, and the weight of Rebecca Alderton's words, and the weight of her own response to them, and she thought about her mother, who had been certain, who had chosen a man everyone said was wrong and been right about it, who had had 6 years. 6 years was not enough, but it was 6 years of a real life. Eliza thought about real lives, about what they required, about the specific courage of choosing something true, even when what was available was known and what was true was not. The carriage slowed. They were back at Ashford Manor. He walked her to the door the way he always did, not the way obligation required, but with the attention of someone for whom the gesture was genuine. At the door she stopped. "Adrian." He looked at her. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right. I have been watching you," she said. "The way you talk to people, the way you listen, the way you handled Gerald Whitmore and Mrs. Drummond and the magistrate and Rebecca Alderton, each one differently. Each one exactly right." She paused. "You are a very good man." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm a careful one," he said. "No," she said. "Careful is something else. Careful is watching the room and deciding what each person needs and giving them only that. What you do is you actually see people. You decide what is true and you act on it." She looked at him. "That is not the same as careful. That is something more." He said nothing for a moment. And then he said Eliza, not Miss Whitaker, her name. The whole weight of it. Yes, she said. I am going to ask you to marry me, he said. Not tonight. There are things I need to arrange first. And I want to do it properly. But I want you to know it is coming. The night was quiet around them. I know, she said. You know, I have known for about 2 weeks, she said. You are not a subtle man. His mouth curved. You said I was careful. You are careful about most things, she said. About this you are entirely transparent. He laughed. Low and real and present. She held good night. Adrian, she said. Good night, Eliza. She went inside. And the house was dark and familiar, and the same as it had always been. And she was not the same as she had always been. And the distance between those two things was the exact shapes of life in the process of becoming something worth choosing. She went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on. She sat down at the table with the account ledger. Because the accounts still needed to be done, and she worked through them in the quiet dark while the house slept around her. But this time when she finished, she did not feel the particular blankness of a woman who has done what is required and returned to nothing. She felt the particular fullness of a woman who has returned to something she does well. In a life that is becoming, slowly and certainly and with some difficulty, one that belongs entirely to her. He proposed on a Tuesday. Not a Thursday, which was the day she had come to associate with him. With the sound of his carriage on the gravel and the specific way the house rearranged its atmosphere when he arrived. Not a Thursday, not at Ashford Manor, not in the front parlor with Lady Ashford positioned by the door. He sent a note Monday evening, asking if she would walk with him the following morning at the east field boundary of the Ashford property, the section of fence line that bordered the county road. Far enough from the house to be out of earshot, close enough to be within the bounds of what was considered appropriate. He phrased it as though he wanted to discuss the property boundary question she had mentioned 2 weeks earlier, which was a real thing they had discussed and which she had opinions about. She knew it was not about the fence line. She wore her second-best dress, which was the best one she actually owned rather than borrowed. And she told Mrs. Beale she would be back before noon. And she walked out through the kitchen garden in the cool morning air, with her hands steady at her sides. He was already there when she arrived. He was standing at the fence line, looking at the road. And he turned when he heard her, and he looked at her the way he always looked at her, directly. Fully, like she was a thing worth the complete attention of a person who didn't give his attention carelessly. Good morning, he said. Good morning, she said. They stood there for a moment, with the morning around them. And then, he said, without preamble, because he was not a man who circled things. Eliza, I would like to marry you. She had known it was coming. She had told him she'd known it was coming, but the actual words, said plainly in the morning air, landed differently than anticipation. She breathed. Yes, she said, I would like that. He looked at her. You're certain? I told you, she said, that you are entirely transparent. I have had 2 weeks to be certain. The corner of his mouth moved. I should be more subtle. No, she said. Don't change that. He reached into his coat and brought out a ring. It was not elaborate, a simple band with a single stone. Dark blue, the color of deep water. He held it out to her. She looked at it. This was your mother's. He blinked. How did you? Hobbs mentioned it once. Not intentionally. He was talking about the estate inventory, and he said the Caldwell jewels were catalogued, and that the blue ring had been set aside from the main collection by your father after your mother died. She looked up at him. He said your father kept it separately. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. He did. I want to, he said. She would have. He stopped. She was a practical woman. She would have approved of you enormously, and she would not have said so directly. And you two would have understood each other perfectly without needing to. Eliza looked at the ring. She held out her hand. It fit, which seemed like more than coincidence. though she knew it was probably just the ordinary mathematics of similar-sized hands across generations. She looked at it on her finger in the morning light. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They stood at the fence line for a while longer, not needing to fill it, and then they walked back toward the house together, and she told him about the fence line question after all. Because it was a real issue, and someone should address it. And he listened and asked 2 clarifying questions, and by the time they reached the kitchen garden, he had a position on it. That was the morning she got engaged. Lady Ashford took the news with the composure of a woman who had been expecting it and had prepared herself thoroughly, and was still, despite all preparation, quiet for longer than usual when Eliza told her. Then she said, "When?" "He's speaking to the solicitor this week." "Likely before the end of the month." Lady Ashford nodded. She looked at Eliza's hand. She looked at the ring for a moment, with an expression that moved through several things too quickly to name. "That was his mother," she said. "Yes." Another silence. "Eliza," Lady Ashford said. "Ma'am, you will need to learn several things before you go to that house." She said it briskly, with the tone of a woman organizing a task rather than having a feeling. "The Caldwell estate is 3 times the size of this one. The staff is larger. The social obligations are considerable. There are tenant families, mill workers, county obligations, I know," Eliza said. "You know the Ashford version. The Caldwell version is different in scale." Lady Ashford looked at her steadily. "I am not saying this to discourage you. I am saying it because you will need to walk in there knowing things. And I am the person most qualified to teach you some of them." Eliza looked at her. "If you want," Lady Ashford said, more quietly. "The offer stands whether you want it or not." "But I will not press if you'd rather." "I want it," Eliza said. Lady Ashford nodded. "Good. We start Thursday." Vivian came to Eliza's room that night. She knocked, which she had never done before, and came in when Eliza said to, and stood in the middle of the small room with her arms crossed, not in the combative way, but in the way of someone who needs to hold themselves together from the outside. She looked at the ring. She said, "I want you to know that I am not angry at you." Eliza waited. "I was," Vivian said. "For about 2 weeks I was considerably angry. At you, at him, at Mother, at the general shape of the situation." She paused. "And then I realized I wasn't actually angry at you. I was angry at the fact that someone saw in you in an afternoon what no one in this house has managed to see in me in 26 years. Eliza was very still. "I am not." Vivian stopped. Started again with the precision of a woman choosing her words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. "I am not asking for your pity. I am not particularly interested in sentiment. I am telling you this because I have spent a long time being prepared and qualified and impressive. And it occurred to me, watching him talk to you, that I have no idea what I actually want. Beyond the impression of wanting the right things." She paused. "That seemed like something I should know," Eliza said. Carefully, "What do you actually want, Vivian?" Vivian looked at her. "I don't know yet," she said. "That is the problem." She uncrossed her arms. "I wanted you to know that the anger has passed, and that I am glad someone in this house is getting out of it with something real." She left. Eliza sat with that for a long time. The preparations moved quickly once the solicitor had the paperwork in order, which took 8 days and involved 3 separate conversations between Adrian's solicitor and a second solicitor he hired specifically to review the terms of the first. A thing Eliza found out about from Hobbs, who mentioned it, without apparently realizing she hadn't known. She asked Adrian about it directly the next time she saw him. He said, "I wanted someone looking at the documents who was looking for your interests specifically. My solicitor is excellent, but he works for me." She stared at him. "You hired a second solicitor to check the first solicitor's work on my behalf." "Yes, that cost money." "Some," he agreed. "Adrian," Eliza, he said, in the same tone, which was not the tone of someone being difficult, but of someone who had made a reasonable decision and was at peace with it. "You have spent 19 years with no legal protection of any kind. no wage, and no documented standing in the household that housed you. The least I can do is make certain that every document associated with this marriage is reviewed by someone whose only job is to ensure your interests are represented." She looked at him. "Furthermore," he said, "the second solicitor found 2 clauses in the original draft that would have been disadvantageous to you in the event of—" He paused. "In certain circumstances. They have been corrected." Eliza sat down because her legs had decided the information was enough to process standing. "What kind of clauses?" she said. He told her. They were the kind of clauses that appeared in marriage contracts routinely. Standard language that few brides' families scrutinized because few brides' families had the legal knowledge to understand what they meant. Language about property management, about what happened to personal assets brought into the marriage, about the financial arrangements in the event the marriage ended. She understood every word he said. That was, she realized, why he had told her, not because he assumed she would understand, but because he knew she would, and he was extending her the respect of a full explanation. She said when he finished, "Most women don't know those clauses exist." "No," he said. "They don't. Most women's families don't either." "No, you could have simply had them corrected without telling me." "Yes," he said. "But then you wouldn't know what had been in the original draft. And I think you should know." She looked at her hands. "You think I should know everything. I think you are the kind of person who should know everything," he said. "And I think you have been kept from knowing things for a long time. I don't intend to continue that." It was, she thought, the most important thing he had said to her. More important than the proposal. More important than the ring. More important than all the Thursday afternoons. Those had told her how he saw her. This told her how he intended to treat her. And the two things being the same, that was the thing she had not known she was looking for until she found it. "All right," she said. "Tell me what else." He told her everything. The wedding was small, by the standards of what it could have been. Adrian had the capacity and the social obligation to stage the county event of the decade if he chose. And he did not choose. He chose the county church. A Tuesday morning, the magistrate as a witness, Clara as Eliza's attendant, because Eliza asked her and Clara had said yes before the sentence was fully finished. Rosalind came to her the morning of and helped her with her hair, which was unexpected and which neither of them discussed as being unexpected. She did Eliza's hair with the quick, competent hands of a woman who has arranged her own hair for years and understands the mechanics of it. And she worked in silence for a while, and then she said, "He's going to be good to you." "Yes," Eliza said. "I can tell. Not because he's performed it, but because the way he talks about the estate when he talks to you is the same way he talks about the people on it. Like they're real. Like it matters." She paused, fingers moving through Eliza's hair. "Most men who have what he is talk about their land like it's furniture." Eliza was quiet. "Rosalind," she said, "what do you want?" Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want someone who thinks I'm interesting." She said it simply. Without the practiced lightness she usually applied to things that were actually serious. "Not beautiful. I know I'm beautiful. That's not I want someone who finds the thing underneath the beautiful interesting." She paused. "I'm working on figuring out what that thing is." Eliza met her eyes in the mirror. "It's there," Eliza said. "I've seen it." Rosalind looked at her. "You have?" "The way you listened to Adrian talk about the mill contracts," Eliza said. "You asked 3 intelligent questions in a row, and you already knew the first 2 answers. You were testing whether he knew what he was talking about." A pause. "And Rosalind said, 'He passed,'" Eliza said. "And you let yourself actually engage after that. That's not charm. That's assessment. You are sharper than you let people see." Rosalind said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Don't tell Vivian I can do this." "She already knows," Eliza said. Rosalind laughed. "The real one, not the practiced one." "Of course she does." She finished Eliza's hair. The wedding was at 10 in the morning and it was over by 11, and Eliza was married before noon on a Tuesday. which seemed exactly right, because she had always been a person who finished important things efficiently and without unnecessary ceremony. Clara cried. She cried with the complete and unembarrassed openness of a person who has decided that feelings are real and should be acknowledged. And she wiped her eyes with her sleeve rather than a handkerchief, because she had forgotten the handkerchief. And she smiled the whole time she was crying. Lady Ashford did not cry. But she held Eliza's hands for a long moment before the carriage came. And she looked at her with the expression she had worn that evening in the linen room, when she had said your mother would have been proud of you. And she said, "Only write to me," Eliza said. "And if the Caldwell housekeeper gives you trouble, tell me. I've known her for 20 years and she owes me a favor." Eliza looked at her. "Go, Lady Ashfordly." She went. Caldwell Manor was large. She had known it was large. She had known the number 6,000 acres. A mill, the wool operation, 43 indoor staff, including the house staff. She had known it the way you know a thing from records before you know it, from standing inside it. Standing inside it was different, but not in the way she had been afraid it would be different. Not overwhelming, not alienating. It was large the way a problem you are genuinely equipped to solve is large, substantial. Real, demanding but not beyond her. She walked through it the first afternoon with Adrian beside her, and Hobbs behind them both. And she asked questions, and Hobbs answered them, with the precise efficiency of a man who appreciated precision. And by the end of the afternoon, she had a mental map of the estate's operations that was not complete but was structural. The housekeeper was a woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who was 60 and capable, and who had been managing Caldwell Manor since Adrian's parents' time, and who looked at Eliza, when they were introduced, with the careful assessment of a woman who had a great deal invested in the current arrangement and was deciding how much of a threat the new arrangement represented. Eliza looked back at her with equal steadiness. She said, "Mrs. Fletcher, Lady Ashford speaks very well of you, Mrs." Fletcher's expression shifted by a fraction. "Lady Ashford is kind, she is accurate," Eliza said. "She doesn't say things she doesn't mean. If she says you run a good house, she means you run a good house." A pause. "I understand," Eliza said. "That the house has been running well for a long time without me. I'm not here to change that. I'm here to understand it." She met Mrs. Fletcher's eyes. "And I will not pretend to understand things I don't yet understand. If you tell me something is done a certain way for a reason, I will ask you the reason, and if the reason is good, I will keep it that way." Mrs. Fletcher looked at her for a moment. "And if the reason isn't good," she said, "then we'll discuss it," Eliza said. "Together, before anything changes." Another pause. Then Mrs. Fletcher said, "The previous arrangement for the kitchen supply ordering has a flaw in the autumn quarter. We run short on preserved goods by February consistently. How long has that been true?" 6 years. "What would fix it?" Mrs. Fletcher told her. It was a specific and practical answer that someone had clearly worked out in detail and never been asked for. Eliza listened completely. "All right," Eliza said. "Let's fix it." Mrs. Fletcher's expression did not warm exactly. But it settled. The specific settling of a person who has decided to extend provisional trust to someone who has given them a reason. It was enough. It was exactly enough. The staff was the same. They were cautious. Some of them were visibly skeptical. Eliza had expected this and did not take it personally, because she understood that skepticism was the reasonable response to an unknown quantity. And she was an unknown quantity. She had walked in from a household they had heard about only in fragments, with no title, no history they recognized, and the trust of a man who had earned theirs over years. She could not demand their trust. She could only earn it, the way she had earned everything in her life, by doing the work correctly, consistently, and without pretending to competencies she didn't have. She spent the first 2 weeks learning. She asked questions constantly. She followed Mrs. Fletcher through the house schedules, and followed Hobbs through the estate accounts, and asked Adrian about the mill operations in the evenings, when they sat in the library after dinner, which had become the time they really talked, without ceremony or performance, about everything that needed discussing and everything that didn't. She liked the evenings. She liked them, in the way she liked things that were genuinely good, rather than things that were supposed to be good. 3 weeks after the wedding, she found the problem. She found it the way Oishes found problems, by reading the accounts carefully and asking questions about the numbers that didn't quite resolve when she worked them. The estate had a second set of books. Not a secret second set? Hidden and deliberate. An accidental second set, a situation where two separate people had been maintaining records of the same transactions for the same estate operations without knowing the other was doing it, which created discrepancies, which created a gap where money moved in ways that didn't appear clearly in either record. She took the 2 account books to Hobbs. She said, "Can you explain this to me?" Hobbs looked at the books. He went very still, in the way that people go still when they are confronted with something they recognize. "Where did you find the second ledger?" he said. "In the filing cabinet in the estate office," she said. "Behind the current year accounts." He was quiet. "Hobbs," she said, "I need you to explain this to me." He looked at her. He was a careful man. Hobbs not dishonest. She was quite certain of that. But careful in the way of a man who has managed a complex situation for a long time and has made decisions about what to communicate and what to hold quietly. "The second ledger," he said, "was maintained by the previous estate manager. Before my time. The previous estate manager left 8 years ago," she said. "Yes, but the entries in this ledger continue past his departure date." She turned to the relevant pages. "These entries are in a different hand. They continue for 3 years after he left." Hobbs was very still. "Whose hand?" she said. He said after a long moment, "Mrs. Fletcher would know better than I would." Eliza looked at him. He met her eyes. Some things were managed differently before His Grace took full control of the estate. When he was still young, when there were other people making decisions. "Who?" she said. He said carefully, "His uncle managed the estate for 4 years after his father died. Until Adrian was of age." She looked at the ledger. "The discrepancy," she said slowly, working it through. "Over the 3 years of these entries, what does it amount to?" Hobbs was quiet for a long moment. £8,000, he said. "Approximately." She set the ledger down. £8,000, over 3 years, in a second set of books maintained by someone after the estate manager left. During the 4 years when a young man had inherited a dukedom and a family member had stepped in to manage it. "Does Adrian know?" she said. "No," Hobbs said. "His Grace, when he took full control." The accounts were presented to him as settled. The transition was presented as. He stopped. It was presented cleanly. It wasn't clean. "No, his uncle," she said. "Is he still living?" "Yes, he lives in the north." "They correspond occasionally." She looked at the ledger. She thought about £8,000, about what it represented. About the 4 years between a father's death and a son's majority. About the specific vulnerability of a young man who had inherited everything and trusted the wrong person to help him manage it. She thought about what it would mean for Adrian to learn this. She thought about the solicitor who had reviewed the original marriage documents and found 2 clauses that needed correcting. She thought about Adrian telling her without being asked. She picked up the ledger. "I need to show this to Adrian," she said. "Yes," Hobbs said quietly. "I know, she found him in the mill office," which was where he spent Tuesday afternoons, going over production figures with the mill manager. She waited at the door until the mill manager left, and then she came in and put the ledger on the desk in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. "What is this?" she told him. All of it, clearly and completely, the way he had told her about the solicitor's clauses, everything. Without softening, because she had learned from him that being known completely was worth more than being protected from difficult information. He was quiet through all of it. When she finished, he reached out and opened the ledger to the pages she had marked. He read them. She watched his face. She saw the moment he understood what he was reading, the slight shift in the muscles around his jaw. The stillness that settled over him, that was different from his usual stillness. Heavier, more internal. He sat back. He said he managed this estate for 4 years. I was 20 when I took. I reviewed the accounts. I thought he stopped. I thought they were in order. They were made to appear in order, she said. The discrepancy is in the gap between the two ledgers. You would only find it if you were reading both simultaneously. He was quiet. She waited. He said £8,000, approximately. I would need to reconcile both ledgers fully to get the exact figure. He looked at her. You found this in 3 weeks. I found the second ledger in 3 weeks, she said. It wasn't hidden, it was just filed behind other things. It was filed, he said slowly, in a place where no one who wasn't specifically looking for it would find it. Yes, and you were specifically looking. I was reading everything, she said, because I didn't know what I didn't know yet. He was quiet for another long moment. Then he said, my uncle wrote to me last month. He wants to visit. In the spring. Eliza looked at him. I haven't responded yet, Adrian said. What are you going to do, she said. He looked at the ledger. He looked at it for a long time, and she could see him working through it, not the anger, which was present. She could feel it in the quality of the air between them. But the thing beyond the anger, the decision about what came next. He said, I'm going to need a solicitor. The second one, she said. His eyes met hers. Yes, the one whose job is to look for things that shouldn't be there. She nodded. And then, he said, depending on what he finds, I'm going to need to have a conversation with my uncle that I have been avoiding for 8 years without knowing why I was avoiding it. He paused. I think some part of me knew something was wrong. I couldn't find it. Yes, she said. And then you walked in, he said, and read the accounts for 3 weeks and found it. Yes. He looked at her with the full and specific attention that was his particular quality. He said, Eliza, I want you to understand something, all right? I did not marry you because I needed someone to manage my household. She waited. I married you, he said, because you are the most honest person I have ever met. And the most capable. And because you see things clearly and say what you see. Even when it costs you something. He paused. But finding this, he looked at the ledger. This is not something I expected. And I want you to know that you are not. You have not been brought here to fix things. You are not a function. You are my wife. She sat with that. I know, she said. I'm not certain you entirely believe it yet, he said. She looked at her hands. The ring on her left hand. Dark blue, his mother's. I'm working on it, she said honestly. Good, he said. Keep working on it. She looked up at him. I will fix what my uncle did, he said, or I will try. Some of it may not be recoverable, but I will know the true shape of it now. And I will deal with it honestly, he paused, because that is how this house operates. From now on. She heard the from now on. She heard what it meant that there was a before. And there was an after, and the after started here. With 2 account books on a desk in a mill office, and a woman who had read both of them. All right, she said. All right, he said. He reached across the desk and put his hand over hers briefly. The same clean direct contact he had offered at the fence line the morning he proposed. And then he picked up the ledger and began reading it from the beginning. And she sat across from him and answered his questions as they came. Because there were a great many questions, and they were going to be in this office for a long time. And she thought, sitting there across the desk from the man she had married 3 weeks ago in a small church on a Tuesday morning, that this right here, this working through a real problem together with all the information on the table and no performance required, was exactly what she had meant when she told him she thought they could give each other honesty. She had not known then how many forms honesty would take. She was learning, and the learning, difficult as parts of it were, felt like the truest thing she had done in her entire life. The second solicitor's name was Mr. Crane, and he arrived at Caldwell Manor on a Thursday morning with 2 leather cases full of documents and the quiet, focused energy of a man who had been told there was a problem in a set of accounts and had already formed several hypotheses about what kind of problem it was. Eliza met him in the front hall and took him directly to the estate office, where she had spent the previous 4 days reconciling both ledgers line by line and producing a clean summary document that laid out every discrepancy in chronological order with the corresponding entries from each book side by side. Mr. Crane looked at the summary document for approximately 3 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "You prepared this yourself?" "Yes," Eliza said. "How long did it take you?" 4 days. I would have had it sooner, but I wanted to verify each figure twice before putting it in the summary. He looked at her over the top of the document. "You verified each figure twice." "I always verify figures twice," she said. "It was a habit I developed at Ashford Manor. Suppliers occasionally make errors in their favor, Mr." Crane was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Caldwell, in 20 years of estate law, I have received exactly 3 client-prepared summaries that I did not need to substantially correct before I could use them. This will be the 4th. Eliza said, "Is that useful?" "Enormously," he said. "It means we can begin immediately." Adrian came in 20 minutes later, and the 3 of them spent the morning going through it together. Mr. Crane asked questions. Eliza answered the ones about the accounts. Adrian answered the ones about the timeline of the estate management, about his uncle, about the transition period when he had taken full control at 20. There were moments in that conversation that were difficult to watch. Not because Adrian lost his composure, he did not. He sat across the desk with the same steadiness he brought to everything, but because of what the questions revealed about what a 20-year-old young man had not known to ask when he inherited an estate from a father who had died. Too young, and a family member had stepped in to help. He had been 20. He had trusted. He had been shown clean accounts, and he had believed them because he did not yet know enough to find what had been hidden. At one point, Mr. Crane said, "Your Grace, it should be noted that the concealment was sophisticated. This is not a case of obvious fraud that a reasonable person would have caught on initial review." Adrian said, "I know. I want that noted because Mr. Crane," Adrian said, not unkindly, "I appreciate it. But what I need from you is what can be recovered and through what mechanism." Not reassurance, Mr. Crane looked at him, then at Eliza, then back at him. "Of course," he said. "What could be recovered?" It turned out, was a portion. Not all of it. Some of the money had moved through too many transactions over too many years to be traced cleanly. And some of the legal avenues were complicated by the passage of time. But a portion was recoverable, and the mechanism was a formal demand through proper legal channels, which would require Adrian to make a decision about whether he was willing to make that demand of his father's brother. He did not hesitate. "Begin the process, Mr." Crane left with both ledgers and the summary document and the promise of a formal assessment within the fortnight. After he left, the estate office was very quiet. Eliza sat across the desk from Adrian and did not fill the silence, because she had learned that he sometimes needed silence after difficult things, the way other people needed to speak. After a while he said, "I keep thinking about the tenant cottages." She looked at him. "When I rebuilt them," he said, "after the flood, I used estate funds. I thought the estate could absorb it because the accounts showed a strong reserve." He paused. "Some of that reserve may have been the numbers, may have been presented to me in a way that covered the gap. I may have spent money I thought I had, because the accounts had been structured to make it look like I had it." She understood what he was saying. "You want to know if the cottages were built on false ground?" "Yes, Mr. Crane will be able to tell you," she said, "once he has the full picture. And if they were, then you built them anyway," she said. "With money you thought you had." The families have roofs. That doesn't change because the numbers were wrong. He looked at her. What changes, she said, is the accounting, not the act. He was quiet. Then he said, how do you do that? Do what? Find the thing that holds still, he said. When everything else is moving. She thought about it honestly. I think it's because I've spent most of my life with unstable but the work, she said. When the work is done correctly, it's done correctly. That doesn't change based on what anyone thinks about it. It was the only thing I had that was entirely mine. She paused. So I learned to find it quickly. The thing that holds still. He nodded slowly. The cottages hold still, she said. The families are housed. Start there. A week later, a letter arrived from Adrian's uncle. It arrived in the Morning Post, which Eliza sorted the way she had always sorted correspondence recording. Organizing, delivering. She delivered this one to Adrian in the library without comment and went back to the estate office to work. He came to find her an hour later. He knows, Adrian said. She looked up. The letter is he knows something has been set in motion. He didn't receive formal notice yet. Mr. Crane's letter won't arrive until tomorrow. But he knows. He set the letter on the desk. I was asking to come and speak to me before any formal proceedings. Are you going to allow it? Adrian sat down. I don't know yet. What does he say in the letter? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he read it aloud. It was a careful letter, the letter of an intelligent man who was managing a situation. Not the letter of a man who was sorry. It acknowledged that there were questions about the estate accounts from the transition period. It suggested that some of the figures might have been recorded in a way that created apparent discrepancies that had innocent explanations. It expressed a strong preference for resolving the matter privately, within the family, without the involvement of formal legal processes. When Adrian finished reading it, Eliza said, he is asking you to close it quietly, yes, because a formal process would make it a matter of record. Yes. What do you want to do? He set the letter down. I want to know what he thinks the innocent explanations are, he said. Because I have read those ledgers, and I have read your summary, and I do not see innocent explanations. I see careful concealment. Then go into any conversation knowing that, she said. Don't go in looking for a reason to believe him. Go in with what you know and listen to what he says against it. He looked at her. Will you come with me? She met his eyes. If you want me there. I want you there, he said. Because you know the accounts better than I do. And because he stopped. Because I trust your read of people. She thought about the county assembly. About Gerald Whitmore recalibrating. About Mrs. Drummond's smile. About Rebecca Alderton and the 6 feet and the choice to walk it. All right, she said. Then I'll be there. His uncle. Thomas Caldwell arrived 4 days later. He was 61 years old. Silver-haired, with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being the most important person in most rooms. And he walked into Caldwell Manor with the specific quality of a man returning to a place he still considered partly his. He greeted Adrian warmly and looked at Eliza with the careful assessment of someone who had heard about her and was forming his first impression. She looked back at him with equal care. They sat in the front drawing room, not the estate office, which Adrian had chosen deliberately, she understood, to keep the conversation from looking like an interrogation before it needed to be one. Thomas Caldwell spoke about the journey. He spoke about the county. He made 2 comments about how well the manor looked and directed them at Adrian rather than Eliza, which was either habit or a deliberate exclusion of her from the conversation's first layer. Adrian let him talk. He was very good at letting people talk. Then he said, Thomas, tell me about the transition accounts. Thomas Caldwell's easy manner shifted by a fraction. Just a fraction. If she hadn't been watching for it, she might have missed it. The accounts from when you managed the estate, Adrian said. Between father's death and my majority. I have questions, Thomas said. I thought we might discuss this privately first. My wife is here, Adrian said. She is the person who found the discrepancy. She should be part of the conversation. A pause. Thomas looked at Eliza again. This time the assessment had a different quality. The discrepancy, Thomas said carefully, is the result of a double entry system that was maintained by the previous estate manager before he left, and that was never fully reconciled after his departure. The apparent gap is an accounting artifact, not an actual. The entries in the second ledger continue for 3 years after the estate manager left, Eliza said. Thomas looked at her. The handwriting changes at that point, she said. The entries prior to his departure are in his hand. The entries after are in a different hand. 2 different people maintained 2 separate sets of records of the same transactions. Which is not a reconciliation failure. That is a deliberate parallel structure. The room was very quiet. Thomas said, "You are very confident for someone who has been reading these accounts for 3 weeks, she said. Yes, I tend to understand accounts quickly. I verified each figure twice. She held his gaze. Whose hand is in the second ledger after the estate manager left? A long silence. Thomas looked at Adrian. Adrian said nothing. He had told her before the meeting. Let him come to it. Don't push past the point where he chooses what he says. Let him choose. Thomas said, there were expenses during the transition that were difficult to categorize. The estate was in it, there were pressures. Your father's debts were more significant than had been initially. My father had debts, Adrian said. Another silence. A different kind. There were some obligations, Thomas said carefully, that were not in the primary accounts. I managed them during the transition to protect the estate's public standing. To protect yours. By taking £8,000, Eliza said. The number in the air between them. Thomas's composure broke along a hairline fracture. The figure is not, it is accurate, she said. To within £50, which is the margin of the transactions I could not fully trace. The core figure reconciles clearly. Thomas looked at her with the expression of a man who had walked into a room expecting to manage a situation and found the situation already managed. He looked at Adrian. I protected this estate, he said. I kept it together during 4 years, when you were not capable of running it yourself. I made difficult decisions. Some of those decisions involved funds that were, he stopped. Reconsidered. The expenses were real. They may not have been recorded in a way that was, Thomas, Adrian said. Quietly, with the specific weight of a man who has decided. I am not going to debate the accounting with you. I have a solicitor for that. I am going to ask you one thing. Thomas waited. Did you take money from this estate that was not yours to take? The silence lasted a long time. Thomas Caldwell looked at his nephew. He looked at the man that the 20-year-old boy had become. And something moved through his face, not remorse exactly. Not yet, but the recognition that the conversation he had planned and the conversation that was happening were not the same conversation. He said, some of the funds were handled in a way that would not survive formal scrutiny. Yes, Adrian said. Or no. Another silence. Yes, Thomas said. The word fell into the room and did not echo because the room absorbed it completely. Adrian said, Mr. Crane will be in contact. You will cooperate with him fully. Whatever can be returned will be returned. Whatever cannot will be documented. And then this will be done, Thomas said. Adrian. That is my decision, Adrian said. You will have the opportunity to speak with Mr. Crane and present whatever you need to present. But there will be no private resolution. There will be a proper accounting. He paused. That is how this estate operates now. Thomas left that afternoon. He left with the contained stiffness of a man who had not gotten what he came for. And the carriage took him back down the county road. And Eliza watched it go from the window of the estate office and felt the specific settling of a thing that has been held in suspension, finally finding the ground. Adrian came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, thank you. For what specifically? For not letting me soften it, he said. When he started talking about my father's debts, I felt myself I wanted to give him the space to explain. To find a version that made sense. I know, she said. I could see it. Why didn't you let me? She looked at him. Because you would have regretted it, she said. You know what the accounts say. You would have sat with a soft version for a week, and then come back to what you actually know. He nodded slowly. Also, she said. He was not being honest. He was managing. Those are different things. A man being honest deserves the space to explain. A man managing deserves to be asked the direct question. Adrian looked at her. How do you know the difference? Because honest people answer the direct question, she said. Managing people answer the question they wish you'd asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My father would have liked you. She blinked. Adrian paused. He was a plain-speaking man. He didn't have patience for people who circled things. He would have asked you what you thought, and then actually listened, and then argued with you if he disagreed. He looked at her. He would have argued with you a great deal, I think. And he would have respected you enormously. She didn't know what to do with that. Exactly, she said. I'm sorry I didn't know him. So am I, Adrian said. The formal resolution with Thomas Caldwell took 2 months. Mr. Crane was thorough, and the process was not simple, and there were several points at which things became legally complicated and emotionally more complicated. Because Thomas was family, and the money had been spent over 8 years and could not all be recovered, and Adrian had to make decisions, repeatedly, about what was worth pursuing and what was worth letting go. He made those decisions with Eliza. Not because she told him what to do, she was careful about that. Careful to lay out the information clearly and then step back from the deciding. But he wanted her there when he thought through it. And she was there, and they sat in the library in the evenings after dinner and worked through it the way they worked through everything, which was honestly and completely, and with all the information on the table. During those 2 months, other things happened. Clara's school opened. It opened on a cold morning in February, in a building on the south edge of the Caldwell estate that had been used as a storage facility, and which Adrian had cleaned and fitted out at Clara's specification, which was precise and practical, and had included a detailed breakdown of materials needed and estimated costs that she had presented to him in writing, because she knew, as she told Eliza privately, that a written proposal was more likely to be taken seriously than a verbal one. It had been taken very seriously. There were 14 children on the first day. Clara stood at the front of the room and looked at them with the expression of a woman who has found the thing she was built to do and knows it. And she said good morning, and they said good morning back. And the school was real. Eliza was there for the opening. She stood at the back of the room and watched Clara, and felt something in her chest that was too large and too specific to call pride. Though pride was part of it. It was the feeling of watching someone become what they were supposed to be. The feeling of a thing that was supposed to exist finally existing. Rosalind came too. She stood next to Eliza at the back of the room and watched her sister, and said quietly she always knew what she wanted. Yes, Eliza said. I used to think that was simple, Rosalind said. Knowing what you want. I thought it was a lesser thing than being impressive. She paused. I was wrong about that. Eliza looked at her. I've been corresponding with a woman in the city, Rosalind said. She runs a trading company. She needed someone to manage her correspondence and social relations while she was traveling for business. She wrote to a contact who wrote to another contact, and somehow my name came up. She paused. I start in April. Eliza stared at her. Don't make a large thing of it, Rosalind said. It's a practical arrangement. She needed someone with social fluency, and I have that, and I need something to do that is actually mine. And this, does your mother know? I told her last week. Rosalind was quiet for a moment. She cried. Lady Ashford cried briefly, Rosalind said. And then she gave me the name of a seamstress in the city and told me I should have at least 4 professional dresses made before I started, and that the seamstress owed her a favor and would give me a good rate. Eliza laughed. The real laugh, the unguarded one. Rosalind smiled. The real smile, not the practiced one. I know, she said. They watched Clara teach for another few minutes, and then they stepped out because the children were beginning to notice the audience, and Clara needed the room to herself. It was cold outside. The sky was the flat pale gray of a February morning that has not yet decided what it wants to be. Rosalind said, "Is she well, Vivienne?" "She writes to me sometimes," Eliza said. "She's been spending time in the city. She has been speaking with a barrister about reading law." "Reading law," Rosalind repeated. "There is at least one firm that has taken a woman as a clerk," Eliza said. "It was in the county paper. Vivienne sent me the article with nothing written on it. Just the clipping." Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Then she said she always should have been a barrister. "Yes," Eliza said. "I think she's figuring that out." A pause. "Things are different," Rosalind said. "Not the way someone says it when they're uncertain about different. The way someone says it when they mean the difference is real and they are standing in it." "Yes," Eliza said. "Better?" She thought about Adrian and the accounts on the desk between them. She thought about the morning at the fence line and the ring, dark blue, that she was wearing right now under her glove. She thought about Mrs. Fletcher and the kitchen supply ordering and the gap that had been running for 6 years and had now been fixed. She thought about Hobbs and his quiet steadiness and the way he had said "I know" when she said she needed to show Adrian the ledger. She thought about the specific quality of the evenings in the library. The honesty of them, the feeling of a life that was genuinely hers, not borrowed, not performed, not held together with invisible labor and invisible effort, but genuinely, completely solidly hers. "Yes," she said. Better. Spring came to Caldwell Manor the way it always did, gradually, and then suddenly. The way most important things arrive. Eliza was in the kitchen garden one morning in April when Adrian came to find her. She heard him before she saw him, the specific sound of his footsteps, which she knew by now the way you know the rhythms of a life you've grown into. He stood at the edge of the garden and looked at her. She looked back. "Mr. Crane sent the final report," he said. She set down what she was holding. "And 6,400 pounds recoverable," he said. "The remainder is documented but unrecoverable through legal means. Mr. Crane recommends accepting the settlement Thomas has agreed to and closing the formal proceeding." She looked at him steadily. "What do you want to do?" He was quiet for a moment. "I want it to be done," he said. "I want the account to be honest, and I want to stop spending my evenings on it." He paused. "Is that the right decision?" "You know it is," she said. "You knew before you came out here." "I know," he said. "But I wanted you to say so, Adrian." "Yes, it's the right decision," she said. He nodded, the tension in his shoulders released by a fraction that she would not have noticed 2 months ago. She noticed it now. "I spoke with the magistrate yesterday," he said. "About the charter review. In March," she said. "Yes, I had assumed, since the Thomas situation. It was postponed to April," he said. "It's next week. He is still expecting you." She looked at him. "Me specifically," he said, and I am quoting directly. That he wanted the woman who had actually read the document and who would not require 45 minutes of explanation before she could engage with the substance of the matter. Eliza considered this. "He said it to a duke." "He did," Adrian said. "Magistrate Harley is a direct man. I appreciate it about him." She looked at the garden. She thought about the county assembly and the charter and the magistrate's handshake. She thought about what it meant to walk into a room where someone was expecting her specifically. Not the Duke's wife, not the former servant who had married up. Her Eliza Whitaker, who had read the document all right, she said. "I'll go." "Good," he said. He started to turn back toward the house. "Adrian." He stopped. She looked at him across the kitchen garden with the April morning around them. "What you said to me," she said, "when we were in the estate office after Thomas left. About your father." He waited. "I have been thinking about it," she said. "About what it means to have someone's respect after they're gone. What it means to be told that someone would have." She stopped. Started again. I spent 19 years in a house where the person I belonged to by blood was dead, and the people who took me and did so from obligation, and kept me because I was useful. She paused. I didn't know how to hold the idea of being genuinely wanted by a family. I didn't have the shape for it. She looked at him. I'm learning the shape, she said. It's taking some time. He crossed the garden. He stood in front of her and looked at her, the way he had looked at her the very first afternoon. In the drawing room at Ashford Manor, across a room full of people performing the look of a man who had found something he was not expecting and had been honest enough to say so. Take the time, he said. I intend to, she said. And Eliza, yes, you have always been wanted, he said. You were simply in the wrong house. She held that. The morning birds were going in the trees above the garden. Somewhere in the south wing of the house she could hear Mrs. Fletcher directing the Tuesday cleaning with the brisk authority of a woman who had found, over the past months, that the new Duchess of Caldwell was precisely as good as her word, and had accordingly extended her the complete and unconditional respect she gave to people she considered competent. She could hear, faintly, the sound of the mill operating at the bottom of the valley. The steady mechanical rhythm of work being done correctly and consistently by people who were paid fairly, because she had reviewed the wage records in her second week, and Adrian had acted on what she found without a single argument. She could feel the ring on her finger, dark blue, settled there now, the way things settle when they are in the right place. She looked at her husband, and she understood, standing in the kitchen garden of a house that was genuinely hers, with a life that was genuinely hers. Built not from rescue or luck or the arbitrary accident of birth, but from 19 years of doing the work correctly, and one afternoon when the right man had walked into a drawing room and looked past every performance in it to find the only person who wasn't performing, she understood that the quiet woman pouring the tea had not been saved. She had simply finally been seen. And being seen, it turned out, was all she had ever needed to become exactly who she already was.